right, well, let's give this a minute here. This. Oh, yeah. Turn that one off. There we go. All right, so now we're just going to wait until people show up. And we got a crowd here today. I like this. It's crowded. It's crowded. That's what I was saying. How you at the table?
Peanut gallery.
The deal.
Yes. Started 2 months ago.
I watch YouTube all the time. And
oh, are we live? Can they hear us? That's what I really want to know.
A mic and a computer, and then I watch music.
We got a crowd. Oh, I just hear myself now. That's good. Okay. Hey, look at that. We got some people watching and everything. Yes, welcome to the First Baptist Nederland YouTube podcast Bible study studios, right? That's what we're doing. We have some guests here. So if you're here, make sure you type a comment or something, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Facebook, whichever you got. We are not age discriminating here. We have everything from little tiny babies to much wiser, much wiser Scott. Just to remind you, there is a 20-second delay, probably at least, between if somebody says something and whether or not we see it. But to explain to you guys in the room, this is a open time that we can. We've got a couple options here. Hi, Judy. Hi, Lisa. Couple options. So we get to use this time to kind of clarify things that maybe we talked about at class on Sunday night with regards to Jonah. Or hi, Kylie. Kylie Roebuck's joining us. Look at that. Or we can use this time to talk about something maybe you're studying or just generalized questions that you may have. And we'll just kind of do this live. Forgive us if you type something and it takes us for a long time. Hi, Randy. Long time to respond because there is a delay, but we're working out those lovely deals here. So we'll have another person probably joining us here in a bit. And just to give a little bit of a plug for next Tuesday, we have a very special guest maybe joining us. Somebody much smarter than me. Hi, Miss Janet. Will hopefully be joining us for our lunchtime study here. So at this time, we'll just kind of open the chat, open the table for anything that y'all may have. Hey, Don. Boy, we're doing good here. I love this. Anything y'all may have that you want some clarification or you want to just, there's a subject matter you want to talk about or just anything biblical. I don't claim to have all the answers, but my heart is for sure to help adults, students, any age, learn what it is to have a rich and deep Bible study time with God. And so just open up the table, open up the chat. If you guys have questions or you want to know more about something that we've talked about, or
I've got one.
Okay, what you got?
The other night you mentioned the red heifers being brought back to Israel. What's the significance of that, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so let me do this. Pull up here on our stream. There was a article that came out. Let's just click this one. September the 26th. So in Israel today, I'll just kind of give you a little background here. In Israel this past September, middle of September, there were 5 red heifers that flew in. Now, these red heifers are a really big deal because one of the things that the Jews still want to be able to do is build a third temple. One of the things that's really important for Christianity and just for Christianity is the rebuilding of the third temple. If you are a follower of end time studies, eschatology, the third temple is what the Antichrist will perform the abomination of desolation, which is a fancy term for he's going to go in and basically just desecrate this holy place, but there needs to be a holy place in at least Jewish standards for him to desecrate. Now, if you go to Israel today, there's something called the Temple Institute, where you can wander through and see all of the plans. They have it. I mean, if the Jews were to gain full control of the Temple Mount today, they would start building tomorrow. It's that ready. But they've also been training priests. A couple of years ago, they were able to get some really important sheep from Canada that had been lost during the dispersion. So for 2,000 years, they haven't been there, back into Israel. And now they have these red heifers, and they have 5 of them. They have to be unblemished. They can't have any defects or anything like that because they're going to re-implement animal sacrifice. And so this is just the first one I came to, but this is a article about it, and it's built off of in order to fulfill biblical prophecies. I'm quoting now about the cessation of the daily sacrifices on the near Temple Mount, which Daniel 12:11 says, and from that time the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. There shall be 1,290 days, according to Daniel. Only an altar is needed to begin these sacrifices, according to Ezra. From the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, although the foundation of the temple of the Lord had not been laid. And so this is not necessarily, it's not like you'll read a biblical prophecy that says there will be 5 red heifers that will land in Israel for, the sacrificial system. But it's just one more puzzle piece that's fit into the overall prophecies of the end time. And so for them to find these red heifers, which is recorded in Numbers 19, according to this particular thing, they play a vital role in temple worship for ancient Israel. And for them to be there and to be there specifically for this is a big deal. And so does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. We read in Leviticus about if you couldn't afford cows or sheep or whatever, you could get a turtle dove or
yes.
So I guess I don't understand why that's such a big deal. Why these cows and sheep or goats or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. Well, for each of the offerings, there's going to be a specific in Judaism. For each of the offerings, there's going to be a specific level of sacrifice. And if you are able to afford those red heifers, you don't need to settle for the turtle doves or the doves, right? And so those red heifers, those spotless sheep, they all need to be there for those sacrifices. And so it's very specific as to the type and the kinds, and then be unblemished. And so you shouldn't settle. That's what they don't want to do. They don't want to start the sacrificial system settling for the poor man's offering when they can clearly afford the rich man's offering. So if that makes sense. Hi, Pearl.
What event is going to cause them to get control of that land?
Anything that we would speak about at this point is just going to be speculation. Mm-hmm. You can read into any of the news lines today as far as that goes, because right now the Temple Mount is primarily Muslim owned, if not shared, at minimum shared. And so in order for them to do that, well, the Muslims have no desire for that to occur, for them to build a holy place up on top of that mountain, up on top of the Temple Mount. And so it would require some sort of a governmental agreement, a religious agreement that has pretty much never taken place, as you can tell. I mean, just as recently as last summer in the Golem Heights, you're seeing tensions. Even just in the last couple of weeks, you see tensions that rise over there on the Temple Mount specifically. In fact, a group of us, when we were at in the Holy Land, I guess it's been about 5 years now. 5 years ago, when we were there, the day we were supposed to go to the Temple Mount, there was a terrorist attack against a armed guard there, and they actually killed the guy, killed the armed guard. And it was a protest. It was a radical Islamic protest sort of thing for the Temple Mount, and they shut the Temple Mount down. And then by the time we actually were able to go, nobody else wanted to go to the Temple Mount, even though it was probably the most secure place it was ever going to be, because guards were everywhere. And so our group literally got to go and sit on the Temple Mount with nobody there. I mean, it was like our come on, Wade, come on, we got a seat for you right here. It's waiting for you. Our tour guide kind of equated it like, imagine going to Disney World and having the park to yourself. Like, that's how rare it was and how cool it was. So it was unfortunate circumstances, but yeah. So it would require honestly an act of war, an act of God for something like that to occur, where they go on, they all agree to let that Temple Mount go so they could build this temple. My assumption is, it's just clearly opinion, is that it would be a war situation. They would have to overtake the Temple Mount probably by force, or have a larger country be able to say that and do that kind of thing.
So when y'all visited, like, what's the vibe when you're there?
You know, they told us the first time we were there, they told us that it was going to be very uncomfortable, just because even with Judaism, Islam, they're not the most hospitable type people necessarily. If you're not part of their, group, we're kind of seen as like outsiders. And because of that, you could kind of feel awkward and feel uncomfortable. Personally, I never did. Both times that I've been, I felt safe. I felt secure. I felt that the people were really lovely. And I would go back in a heartbeat even today.
So it's not like eerie feeling?
No, not to me. I didn't think it was. There may have been people who felt that it was, but of course nobody here has been. If you've been and you're watching online, tell me what you think. Like, was it eerie feeling for you? For me, I was overcome with how fascinating it was to be there and be standing in a place that I read about in scripture, and it's real, and it's feet on the ground here. And so that kind of overtook any probably eerie feelings. I never felt uncomfortable. I never felt unsafe at all. But I mean, realistically, while it is a place where terrorism happens, it is a place where things like that type of thing happens. So is Houston. We just don't call it terrorism. It's just, crime. Because it's Americans against Americans. For us, it feels terroristic because of our past and things that we've experienced here in America and that kind of thing. And so it's really no different as far as that goes. So, I mean, if you don't go to Houston because you're too afraid, then you may feel uncomfortable in Israel. But, I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible. I would go every single time God opens that opportunity. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody online in the chat have questions or things you want to talk about? I'm assuming they can hear you. I have no idea. I listened for like a millisecond and heard only myself. So, well, I put them to sleep. I started talking. So.
So the other day when we were reading Leviticus, it was the lesson you had for us.
Mhm.
How do you know when the what we've learned from the lesson so far is you find the key words.
Mhm.
Well, what we were looking for wasn't the key words. It was, so how do you know when you've reached something that where you're going to go back and to Jonah and saying, oh, that's where it ties these two together?
Yes. So, ultimately, the underlying question is, how do you know that these two things link, like purposefully link? The best way that you're going to see that is, okay, first you're going to start to recognize it just simply in practice. Like, the more you do it, the more you'll see it. And that's really hard to explain until you begin to experience it. You will read something sometime, and then you'll be like, that kind of reminds me of something. And then it'll just start to flow. Now, what happens is when you read Jonah and you read something like the scapegoat, casting lots, you read the casting lots, you'll read casting lots, and then for some reason it'll be brought to mind, or you'll think about, okay, they cast lots over, the scapegoat. So then what your job is, then you go to the scapegoat, Leviticus 16, wherever that is, and you start to read down there. Now, if it were just casting lots, period, and that's the only thing you're reading and you're not seeing any other connection, then I would venture to say that it wasn't purposeful. It just happened to be that way. the way you're going to know that it was meant to be connected is when you read through them and then you start to see that there are multiple connections, like layers of connections. In other words, as you read the scapegoat narrative, you're reading instructions about something that's not only cast lots on, but then chosen and then sent off away. And a people group ends up atoned for their sins. And so then when you see that, then you'll go back to Jonah and you'll think, okay, there's lots that are cast and somebody is sent away, and a people group end up making vows to God, to Yahweh, basically. And from that point, you can kind of see, okay, well, this seems multi-layered connected, right? Now, there's only going to be so many connections within these little things just because Jonah's so short. But I'm trying to think of another example that connect together. That's something that we talked about in the past that's connected together. Well, an easy one would be the Eden narrative with that she saw the fruit, she desired it for something, and then she took for it for herself. So now what's going to happen is you're going to read Abraham going to Egypt, and Abraham fears for his life. He's afraid he's going to die. And so he pretends his wife is his sister, and Pharaoh decides to have her. Right now, in any way, I would never connect those two stories together, like Adam and Eve taking the fruit and Abraham pretending his wife is his sister, until you see that in the same exact phrasing, it says the Pharaoh saw Sarah and he took her to be his wife, and you go, oh, he saw her and he took her, and then you start thinking, okay, saw and took, that's a big theme. He saw, desired, and took. So then you compare those two narratives, and then you start to realize, okay, Eve saw, she took, and it ended in death. Pharaoh is the one who saw and took, and it ended in life because Abraham didn't die at that point. And so that's where you have to start to battle, and this goes a lot deeper, but surface level. That's where you start to battle whether or not, okay, what is the author trying to show me at this point? Because clearly, as you're reading down these narratives, they're very much using the same languages. And what's happened now is you've been given a pattern in the Adam and Eve narrative. Adam and Eve, you get Eve is now the one who's tempted. The apple is the one that is the tempting thing. Then you have the tempter, the one who the serpent. And you take these characters and you place them in the Abraham story. And what it does is you start to realize, okay, well, what is the one what's in the fruit position of the Adam and or in the Adam and Eve story in Abraham and Sarah? Well, Sarah is the one who's the fruit here, right? Because Pharaoh sees the fruit and wants it and takes it, right? Which makes Pharaoh in somehow Eve's position, right? But what Pharaoh does actually doesn't lead to death. And the one who would be in the serpent's position is the only one left over in the story. Well, that's Abraham. And so now you're left going, whoa, wait a minute. Pharaoh is technically like, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just doing what he thinks is right. And he didn't do anything particularly wrong. Well, neither did Eve. Eve didn't technically know right and wrong at that moment. It's kind of a folly fall when she took that fruit. And so now you're left with these concepts of like, okay, well, Pharaoh's kind of presented as like the guy who did something wrong that he didn't know was doing wrong. And the only one who's presented as doing something wrong was Abraham, the one whom God just promised that he would bless and bring a whole nation out of him and all these type of things. And so these are the type of connections that once you start to make, they become patterns, and you start to see how the way Hebrew scripture works is it will take these patterns and they will shift little aspects of them, and it will speak something different to you, right? And if you read it the wrong way, then Pharaoh's the one who's in the wrong. Abraham is kind of wrong, but you kind of give him a pass because he's kind of a dumb, and you're like, he feared for his life. But at the end of the day, Eve didn't trust God, and Abraham didn't trust God, and Pharaoh's the only one who ends up giving Abraham possessions, life, basically everything that God had just promised him.
It says the live video ended. Did yours do that?
Nope.
Okay.
That's good. It's real good. Wonder if it's still ended. Let's pause for a moment and just see. Stop talking at him.
Right.
Real good. Oh, no, mine still says it. Try to refresh it. If you're still here, say, hello, I'm still here. I still see 9 people watching. Does that make sense, though?
Yes.
So just because there's one word that you'll see in both narratives does not mean that they're intentionally connected. What it does mean is that you need to start doing extra. Good. Hi, Lisa. You need to start doing extra and start to see the layers. Look for more repeated words. If you don't see repeated words that you're seeing in both narratives, then think conceptually, like kind of move outside the story and look at the pattern. What's the pattern that's happening? Is this somehow connected to the pattern? So then you get the Jonah and the scapegoat. This is a pattern now of something being sent out, somebody being atoned for, and you're left kind of wondering, like, okay, what am I supposed to see? Because there's clearly a shift. He's not a goat, and he's not being sent into the wilderness, and there's not another goat that's being sacrificed. So you're just left kind of contemplating like the extra layers, the extra levels of meaning behind all that, if that makes sense.
I think it's been important, like as the youth have gone through this process, I've noticed the importance of bouncing it off of each other. Because
Yes.
like that process that he's talking about, I still don't see
Yes.
connections until we talk about it like on Sunday nights or whatever.
Yes.
And like it's overwhelming still. And we've been doing
Yes.
it what, almost 2 years now.
Yes.
This in-depth Bible study. And so it's so vitally important, I feel like, especially when you're first starting.
Yes.
Is
It's
it
a
balance.
skill.
Oh,
not
it's
something
absolutely.
that you just get a key to and know the right answers.
Right. You're not used to reading anything like that necessarily. Now, if you do, it's because you're probably some sort of an English nerd and you know how to read certain, types of literary forms. But to the Bible, it's incredibly foreign because it doesn't feel the same, way that we're supposed to be reading. For you who've been through this, can you attest to the fact that it's overwhelming at first, but then one day it just something will click in one of your studies, and then it'll kind of, not that you have to give me an example, but do you agree with that statement that at some point you'll just start reading something and it'll click, and then you'll be pulled to a different narrative or a different part of the Bible, and then you'll start to kind of see all these things that I'm talking about sort of kind of fall into place. Not that we've perfected it, but do you guys agree with that? Has that been your experience?
It's been neat to watch the youth because on Sunday nights we go through Judges, which Jason's doing on Sunday mornings, and it's been neat to see them and also be involved in that process. So they're starting now to read through without you even guiding them at first,
Yes.
like just by themselves in groups or pairs or whatever. And it's been neat to see that process, and it is about just patterns. Like it ends up being the same thing every time. The
Yes.
right turns, the keywords, the repetitive stuff. Like, so it's just like your brain almost gets trained to see those things quicker.
Yes. And one thing you do have to realize is that for most of all of Christianity and Judaism, we didn't own these. Like we did not have our own personal copies, which means for most of all of time, this was meant to be read communally aloud in front of groups, right? And that's how most do it. So one of the things that I've added to my own personal Bible study, which has been really, really fruitful, and I encourage everyone to do this, is if you're going into, for instance, like he was in Judges chapter 7. So if I know I want to study Judges chapter 7, then what I'm going to do is I'll pull up on YouTube or on YouVersion or something like that, Judges chapter 7, and I won't have my Bible in front of me. I'll just close my eyes and I'll listen to the chapter. Because what you'll see is something that you've read 1,000 times. Even if you read it before you listen to it, suddenly you'll hear something different that you didn't hear when you read it, right? And I can't explain it, but that was how this was built. It's built to be patterned that way because it's also something that was, for the most of all of Christianity, all of Judaism, had to be memorized. Memorizing, it's no different than like what is it called? Pneumatic. Can't think of the word. Where it makes it easy, a mnemonic, like a mnemonic device. And so once you start to see that, then it becomes clearer and clearer.
That's why they match up the stories and the wording and the verbiage.
So by the time you get to a certain narrative, it will start to fill that pattern in before you ever get to the clear connections, and you'll begin to anticipate what's about to happen because you've now seen this pattern written 15 different times, and you anticipate what's going to happen, and then it shifts and it's different, which makes you go, whoa, wait, that's different than how I read this before. If, like, for instance, if you read the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative and you see that whole narrative is patterned after the flood narrative, well, as it's being set up, you're hearing all those key phrases and words and stuff from the flood narrative. To when it gets to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, you're expecting flood, but it doesn't flood. Instead, fire comes from the sky. So then you go, wait, why? Like, it set up the pattern of the flood, but now we're at fire. And you're reminded of Noah's covenant that God made with him, that he would not flood the earth again like that. And so then you're left questioning, what does this mean? How does this work? Because if you think of it this way, just to oversimplify the whole thing, we have to get to a point in time where Jesus is necessary. And as long as there's still one single way that humanity can fix their own sin problem, whether it be through laws or being more righteous or actually, having kids that don't fight and having the perfect family and having the perfect church, and as long as there was still a way there, Jesus wasn't necessary yet. So what needs to happen is you need a whole Hebrew scripture, Old Testament, that is going to prove that we've tried this every single way. We tried it on our own. We tried it as a world. We tried it as a family. We tried it as a nation. We tried it as with judges. We tried it with kings. We tried it like we tried to kill all the bad people. We tried to accept all the bad people. We have tried every single way in this pattern, because now Jesus will step out of heaven and fix the problem that we clearly, undeniably could never fix ourselves. And so that's why all of these are so connected. And that's why when you read scripture, you'll read these things that just seem so strange and foreign and unnecessary. And there are still things in the Bible that I'm not sure why they're there. I cannot tell you for the life of me why Elisha has some she-bears kill some kids or maul them. I have no idea what's the point of that story yet, but I know it's there for a reason. And more than likely, it's probably filling in part of a pattern that I've read before, and I just haven't made that connection yet. And when you do, then suddenly these things just that seem weird and strange make sense. It fits for some reason. I'll take a quick pause just to see if anybody's still listening online and if they have questions. By the way, if you have questions, don't worry about changing the subjects or anything. Just go ahead and start populating that comment section with whatever questions you've got. That'll make this process a lot easier once we get to them. One of my favorite things about this whole process is you approach how you're reading those passages different. It's no longer about like, what am I reading to make myself better? Because what you see is that like there's no hope for that. You will never read something necessarily and walk away going, you know what, I'm going to be a better person now. Most people don't have that ability. It kind of takes some of the pressure off of that. And now you begin to quit trying so hard to find those little nuggets of truth that you can remind yourself of to be a better person. And you start to realize like, no, there's no hope for us at all. So instead, I'm just going to look at how amazing the word of God is and how amazing God is. And in turn, that begins to make you a better person somehow. And it's difficult to explain, and it seems different than what you'd expect, but it causes you to no longer just accept what you're reading anymore. It makes you go, there's got to be something else here. And when you do that, it's like a whole world just opens up to where now it's not just random stories, but they are highly interconnected, beautiful pieces of art that you're like, I am on a treasure hunt every time I open the Bible. And it suddenly makes those things that seem really difficult, like opening the Bible every day, not seem so difficult. and like telling people about the Bible not seem so difficult. There's not a person in the world that wants to hear you come to them and go, you know what? I was reading the Bible today and I was reminded of how terrible you are as a person. And I think you need to do this better. But there are a lot of people in the world that want to hear about the weird stuff in the Bible that nobody ever talks about, or this awesome, crazy, cool, connected story that you never thought was connected, or some life-changing, changing aspect that seems to fit culture in the world today, like the red heifers and things like that. Going and telling doesn't seem so difficult suddenly.
Well, it's not scary because
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not like this certain ABCD you have to fill in. It's like, did you know about this in the Bible? And like,
Yeah.
it's been fun to see the boys so excited to go tell my parents or whoever, like, we learned about this.
And
it makes you want to get in the Bible more.
How often are your parents who've been churched for longer than I've been alive and have taught and are great and amazing teachers, how often have your boys gone and approached and told them something that they learned in the Bible that your parents are like, oh, I've never thought of it like that?
Mhm. Yep.
Anybody can open this Bible and read what's there. Anybody can, which makes it seem not as cool. Not everybody gets to see the treasure. And that's what I want, and that's what I want everybody to see, is that there is treasure here. And it is not just reading the words that are on a page. It is seeing what the authors are doing and how Jesus will come in every single line of Jesus's life is connecting to this pattern somehow and undoing it. And you're just like, this is insane. You cannot walk away from this once you see this and go, this could not have been done by however many people over this many years without a divine presence behind it, right? Because anybody can write stories. Anybody can write some really, really good stories, in fact.
But like, they didn't know each other and they all fit together. That's one thing that's been like life-changing for me.
Yep.
Like that song you played from that movie where they're
The
all
Encanto?
singing their-
Yeah.
Yes, like,
Yeah.
That's how I felt about it. And it makes you like humbled and like in awe of how it has to be God inspired, because it all like is woven together. It's just amazing.
Yes. Absolutely.
So is it only the first 5 books that do this tying back to Eve, or have you or Daniel, where they're talking about the end times? It all ties back to that as well.
Everything does. Every single thing does. If you, I heard one of my favorite scholars, Tim Mackey. He's over the Bible Project. If anybody knows me, like, I'm very much a Tim Mackey disciple, and I'm absolutely, I couldn't recommend his stuff more. I think he's incredible. But he was asked, if you were stuck on a desert island and could only have one book of the Bible to take with you, what would that one book be? And his thought and my thought at the very same moment were exactly the same. I would take Genesis every day, because Genesis, it is the whole Bible compacted into just 50 chapters. Every single aspect of everything you're going to read from that point forward is all done in micro pictures. And so every single word and repeated phrase is setting up a foundation that the prophets will use, that the Psalms will use, that the New Testament will use, that eschatology will use. You will read in Revelation everything you read in Genesis, because the Bible itself is a chiasm. It is a end to end, Eden to Eden book that mirrors themselves, right? And so it is not just the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, that's going to do this. The Pentateuch are going to do it in very, very, very small micro scale, but every single line intentionally, because it's going to set up exactly all the way to the point that you get to like Ruth, and you start to read Ruth, and Ruth just seems like a story about a kinsman redeemer, about this girl who goes with their mother-in-law and to a different country. But then you realize that Ruth is a pattern and a picture of Israel as a whole, and how Israel does everything that Ruth will be, and how Jesus will be. And it's just these little things, once you start to realize they're all connected, you'll start to see those things, knowing that I'm reading a story about Ruth that actually is a real person that really did this, but it's written divinely to be attached to somehow this whole kinsman redeemer and story is just crazy. Let me read this real quick. Janet Polk says, Jesus taught in parables some got it immediately. Some got it later with commentary. Some never got it. I am the group that needs commentaries. I get frustrated that I can't get the abstract. How can I trust that the commentaries are true? Okay, first of all, commentaries are fantastic. Like, they're great. And you have to understand that there are different levels that you're going to go through. I have gone through levels where I have used commentaries. I've used sermons. I've gone through levels where I've used academics research. Sometimes I still do all those things. But recently I've started realizing that they're not necessary to find some of this stuff. And like I said at the beginning, it's just going to take practice. The only issue I have with commentaries, they're great. Use them. Please use them. They're amazing. But be aware that commentator may only be aware of one aspect of literature. If you have access to scholarly research, scholarly articles and things like that, I would suggest those over. And the reason being, if I were like Scott, I want you to write a commentary over Genesis. And I say, Katie, I want you to write a commentary. I want you to write an article over Genesis 1 through 5. The amount of depth and study and time that's going to be spent on that 5 verses of Genesis 1 versus over what you're kind of stuck in with doing all of Genesis 1 through 50, it's just not going to be the same. Commentators they're going to have, time frames. They're going to have to get things out on. They're going to have to do those things. It's all great. And it doesn't mean it's not true, but it is only going to be, because of time frames and stuff like that, it's only going to be one lane. And so if you're stuck on a passage, read a bunch of different commentaries. Maybe they have different lanes that they're kind of in and going about it. But also do some research on Google. There's nothing wrong with Google. Google literary structures of certain passages that you're reading, because you may discover that there's something there. Google scholarly articles on certain passages, because they may write 10 pages on one word in a single verse, and it may open up your mind. Look at the cross references, see if there are certain phrases that seem to be used at other places. It's not about this. How to study the Bible is not about a 10-step process on this is how you do it. It's not that way. One of my best friends is Lance Howell. Lance and I look at scripture 100% different. He is very analytical. He will see the numbers. He will see the facts. He will see the nations. And I will see the more abstract. Sometimes I get stuck in the abstract. Sometimes he gets stuck in the numbers, right? That's why it is meant to, Acts chapter 2, it's meant to do it as a church, as a community. It's meant to meditate and do it on your own, but it shouldn't stop there. In fact, the whole purpose and point of the church was for worship and for devoting to the teaching, right? And so that's what we're doing. It's for all 5 of us to read the same passage and go, whoa, I didn't even see that. I saw this, because that's how we work. We work with different aspects, different tools. I have a tendency to be a little more artsy with things sometimes. And I need the analytical side of things so that I don't get so abstract that I'm trying to make connections that aren't there. If anybody has known me or been out here when I have all my whiteboards set up out here, they'll know 100% what I'm talking about, because I have a tendency to go above and beyond and start trying to make connections that may not ever be there. And I need people to ground me on that. Whereas people like Lance need me to go, look, it's not just about this number or this nation or this historical figure and when he existed. It's actually telling more of a macro picture of something that's already occurred, micro, and it speaks different things. Hope that answered your question, Janet. Trust the commentaries, use them. Just don't settle for that's the only thing that's going on, and don't settle for that's the only method that you're willing to use.
Does it matter if you get a connection wrong?
So I am not someone who is going to teach theology and doctrines, right? Theology and doctrines, these are something that men have taken, and there's nothing wrong with them. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But they make the concrete. I'm one who'd much prefer to teach just how the authors are using those tool sets, how to approach a scripture, how to exegese it instead of eisegese it. Don't read yourself into the scripture, read scripture through the eyes of the ancient Israelite, and then let that change you. I'm that type of person. If you start to make connections that aren't there, it'll become clear. Like it'll become difficult. And so stick with the things that seem obvious. You don't have to reach. I'm not afraid to go, I think that's a reach. Like, I think we're reaching there. It could be, but I think it's kind of a reach. At that point, I would default back to what you know. I can't think of an example right now, but one of our students, one of our fellow students, Reagan Cognac, knows that I am not a eschatology person. Like I said, I don't like things that I can't decipher meaning from, and I have to guess what that meaning is. And so I tend to stick away from things like Revelation. Because of that, and because of the type of person Reagan is, he's going to go and only study Revelation, but which is great. He's amazing, but he likes to try to ask me if this is connected to something. And so often I have to go, I have no idea. I don't know if the author's intentions are to connect these two things or not, because prophecy is written in abstracts, right? And these abstracts, because they have been fulfilled in the past, but yet there's still aspects of it that aren't fulfilled. I cannot definitively say, yes, this is definitely a connection. I cannot definitively ever say that when it comes to prophetic type things, unless I can tie it to just like when Revelation talks about, it uses language that's going to tie back to Eden or tie back to the Exodus story. I can say, yeah, that I think that this is tying here, but it doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen still. I can read Ezekiel 1 and prove UFOs. There's shiny discs that are in the sky and there's beings in them, and Ezekiel clearly is seeing a UFO. Does that mean that it was a UFO? No. So I have to always be part of studying is just being willing to go, look, I don't know. Like, there are many projects that I've had to set aside and studies that I've had to set aside, including one we talked about last week with Luke, with Wade. I just have to set those things aside because I've done the research. I've tried to look into it, and I just haven't felt comfortable with where it's landed. Like the Elisha and the bears, I'm not comfortable with where that's landed yet. And so I'm going to set it aside for right now, because apparently I'm not made to make that connection at this moment. And I don't want to grasp for something because of my desire to need to answer something. I've lived too much of my life trying to do that and create apologetics to defend something that may have been wrong in the first place. And so stick with what you know. And if you can see those patterns clearly, then you can feel confident in that pattern. If it's still a little fuzzy, there's no need to go and teach it. It's just something that you gotta, in the words of Tim Mackey, you just gotta take a cup of tea and take a long walk and just ponder it, which is why it's called that, meditation literature. I mean, it's meant to do that. You are not going to ever read everything you're ever going to get out of one single passage and just walk away like you just know it. You got it all. If you do, then congratulations. You're probably missing something, right? Mr. Askew, being our first time guest for sure here, do you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to add to the conversation?
Just soaking it all in.
Just soaking it all in.
Very interesting, the comments and the questions that are being asked.
Yeah.
Those type of things. So I'm just kind of.
That's
happy
good.
Just to, I'm learning things
Yeah.
too. So
yeah.
Like I say, I'm not here to learn everything today, but
yeah,
what
you and I both.
And what I'll take home and look at what my notes say.
Yeah.
Something will come out of that too. So maybe I'll have questions next week.
That'd be great. Yeah, that's awesome. Everyone's, I can't believe we've actually we seem to be sticking right at that 9 and 10 frame. It's crazy. Everybody still there, listening, enjoying, or sleeping? This time I know it was not my mom. She texted me. So, she's like, I can't, she's not going to be here. So it's not just my own family watching me.
That is funny. If your mom was the only one watching.
She would totally be the only one watching.
What I found interesting is the repetitive words, like deep, and like we talked about that on Sunday, but it's very interesting, like the word studies and seeing how the same words are used in different passages and can mean different things or can mean the same thing, and that totally changes what you've grown up knowing your whole life about a passage. So that's been super interesting going through this process and just seeing that connection and recognizing it. It happens a lot.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I don't know about you, but it was freeing for me to discover that was intentional.
Yes.
One of the most frustrating things as an American is when you're reading something that just has the same stuff being written over and over and over and over again in a passage. Excuse me. And I'm like, by the fourth, and it was evening and morning the fourth day, you're like, I got it. Like, you don't have to keep ending the same one. And you saw it was good. After their own seed, after their own seed, after their own seed. You're like, I got it. Like, stop saying it over and over again. I was taught not to do that in English class. That feels like filler at this point. But for me once you start to see that it's intentional, like, it was a little bit freeing for me because I didn't have to be so frustrated with a passage. In fact, it became a blinking blue, this is intentional, stop kind of thing. Genealogies I've never ever thought I would have ever said that genealogies are fascinating before, because so-and-so begot so-and-so and they lived so many years and had other sons and daughters does not seem to be exhilarating, until you start to see what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then you're like, whoa, this is crazy.
So since you mentioned that, the other day we had the picture of, when things go down. But I asked you this question about the windows. Yes. And I've read the books of Enoch. The windows are extremely important it's boring in my mind, but it's extremely important apparently in the books of Enoch. And you said that was also mentioned in some other book of the Bible.
Yeah, so it's in the windows of heaven. Here, let me pull that up here. According to the viewpoint of an ancient Israelite, when in Genesis chapter 6, when you read that they opened the floodgates of heaven, like, and the rain began to fall and all that, it's actually used a couple different times. Let me. That I don't have this on the screen. Not apparently. Let me share my screen here. I can't do two things at once. Okay, so if I go to our stepbible.org, which is just a free resource, it's amazing. You can click on this little search panel down here, and you can, if I'm, for instance, trying to look up Windows, like, I don't know that this is anything that's going to show up or not, but if I go to Windows and I click Windows, then you're going to see all the times that windows themselves are used. So one of the first times it's used is in Genesis chapter 7, which is in the middle of the flood narrative. You get the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were open. Now, if we read this through 2022 eyes, we'd be like, there's no windows up there. Like, what are you talking about? If you read this from an ancient Israelite eye, it's blue. It looks like and water falls from that every once in a while. And at this point, it really fell. So it seems as if they opened the windows, right? It's so important. It's repeated just a chapter later in Genesis 8:2. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed at this point. But this will become a theme And what I would do if I were personally studying this is I would slowly work my way down each of these passages, and I would kind of look. Okay, he made for the house windows and recessed frames. In 1 Kings 7:5, all the doorways and windows had square frames, and a window opposite the window of the 3 tiers. And you just kind of read through these things, and you'll start to see, okay, well, there's literal windows here in 1 Kings. You got figurative windows in 7:11. 2 Kings, the captain had answered the man of God, if the Lord himself should make windows in heaven, could such a thing be? And clearly this seems to be tying back to the windows of heaven up here. And so I would maybe jump into 2 Kings and maybe read a little bit more there, because it seems to be more of a figurative statement here. But windows, and then you get into the prophets and watch how the windows become a major theme. Ezekiel, a gateway, had windows all around it, and there were windows in Ezekiel again, and it's windows, and it's vestibule, and Ezekiel again, both its vestibule and its windows, and the thresholds, narrow windows, right? Ezekiel really ties into this windows theme. And then Malachi, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down what now this time? A blessing. And so now you're going to see he's going to take this Windows theme, and he's now not going to pour down death and destruction and decreation. He's going to pour down a blessing here. And so then I would go into Malachi and I'd start to read that. And I don't have all the answers for Windows, but if you start to see that windows are a theme, this is how I would start to go about looking through these windows, right? And looking to see what they mean. Another one that's really big, I can't remember if we talked about it on the stream or not, but doors are going to be big. Gates, doors at the entrance of the gates of the temple, of the doors. All of those things are a pattern that's being set up, because all the times that you're going to be at the entrance of the door, generally speaking, you can make the assumption that on one side it's going to be good and on one side it's going to be bad. And that goes all the way back to that Genesis 3 thing. They're on the other side of the door of Eden, right? And what's crouching at the door waiting to destroy? Well, it's the beast. It's sin. It's this thing that wants to devour you. You go to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're at the door. They're at the door of Lot's house, and on one side is safety with these heavenly beings. On the other side is sin, crouching, wanting to devour what's on the one side. You're going to get these themes and these pictures, and they'll somehow end up having meaning behind them that you maybe don't realize until you realize that until you see that they're all connected in a way. And so the windows of the heavens were opened. It's speaking meaning behind it. I have to do more research down the theme to really give it any kind of meaning. But does that make sense?
Yep.
Makes sense to you guys who are joining us online?
So of the books that were not accepted in the Bible, is there any of them that got the Maccabees, which is basically a history lesson,
Yeah.
which they say is not divinely written.
Yeah.
Enoch, which is not divinely written according to.
Yeah. So there, Jasher is another one that's going to be there. There's certain books that are going to be considered not inspired, not part of canon. And people much smarter than me decided a lot of that. Most of it was actually pretty well decided before any actual people were commissioned to make that final decision. So that's kind of a misnomer. A lot of people think that, there was like a table of people who stood here and was like, okay, this book's in, this book's out, this book's in, this book's out. Realistically, it was more like that they would come and they would go, okay, these books are all good. These ones are kind of used here and kind of not used here. Enoch was one of them. And they would go, yeah, we don't think it should be used. And so the majority of those who consider something canon would not choose Enoch to be a part of it. But it didn't mean everyone did. There's an Ethiopian still today, I believe, sect of Christianity that still believes this is divinely inspired. What it does not mean is that it isn't useful. Enoch is a useful book, specifically First Enoch. usually is generally among scholars considered to be something that was at least during Jesus's time, readable, I should say. It gave a lot of insight into Second Temple Judaism, Judaism, and their mindsets, which would be during Jesus's time. Second and Third Enoch didn't have the same authors as First Enoch, and you can clearly tell. You get into Second and Third Enoch, and there's some strange stuff. Enoch himself becomes Metatron. He becomes like this an angel, and that seems really out there and very weird. But it doesn't mean that Jews did not accept that. There are Jews that did accept that that was an actual thing. And so Maccabees, historical as well. Jubilees, same deal. We tend to accept First Enoch a little bit more and Jubilee a little bit more because we have New Testament books that actually quote them. Jude and Peter are two books that actually quote from those two books. And so we can accept at least that there's some validity behind it, whether it was inspired or just historical in nature.
Books in the Bible quote those books.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Can they be used for historical data?
Absolutely. So
They're accurate in that regard.
Absolutely. And so, for instance, they can be used to help get into the historical mindset of the people who existed during Jesus's time. One of the clearest examples of that is where demons come from. Now, if you are a Christian, a Protestant Christian, who do not accept that Enoch is useful, don't accept that it's useful for any kind of historical mindset or anything like that, then you are forced to answer the idea of demons or demonology to be that of fallen angels. If you are a Second Temple Jew, you believe that demons are actually the excuse my language, but the bastard offspring of the Genesis 6 sons of God, which were heavenly beings who slept with, saw and took women, human women, and had seed with them. And these seeds are the giants in the Bible. The giants in the Bible, they're, for all intents and purposes, little g demigods, and which is why once they died, ancient temple Jews, first or second temple Jews, would believe that the demons are actually the spirits of those of the giant clans, of the ones who came from giants. They weren't eternal. They weren't, they weren't immortal. They were mortal, but also came from half immortal sources. So it kind of left their unclean spirits. And this is another kind of rabbit hole, but something became unclean during in the mindset of an ancient Jews or ancient Israelite by touching something that related to death, right? And so if you are an eternal being and you have a child, that eternal being is going to exist in a mortal body, and mortal bodies die, which would mean the spirits of this eternal thing became unclean. And so in the Old Testament, that's why you get unclean spirits. And that's why in Jesus's time, these demons are like everywhere on all the pages of the Gospels, right? They are trying to gain back control because now the true Son of God is existing in mortal form here on earth. And so you're seeing like a conglomeration of all that demonic activity really show up here. And so Jesus is not just simply casting out demons. He's showing, he's undoing the Genesis 6 account. He's intentionally showing that all power and authority no longer belongs to, for comedic relief, mommy and daddy of the demonic beings, the sons of God, who were watchers, who are the ones who were placed over the nations that we find out in Enoch. But it now belongs to, from in heaven and earth, belongs to him, And so there's a lot. I just word vomited a whole lot of stuff that I oversimplified. But if you read First Enoch, you get a greater understanding of really that concept. And so whether you believe that or take that worldview, it doesn't matter. You don't have to. You don't have to take that worldview. You can read, again, the Genesis 6 account like it's the Sethite view, like it's the generations that are descendants of Seth. But if you don't take that view and you take the sons of God as to be these heavenly beings that had children with humans, then it fits pieces together more in a way. And so it just depends. It does show you that if you go into a certain passage with a preconceived understanding of how that passage is supposed to be reading, then it's going to change how you read certain things. And so these extra books can be very helpful. I don't believe that they're inspired, which means I don't believe that that anybody should ever go to their deathbed saying that this is 100% godly, God inspired. But I do think that they can be helpful to get into a mindset of an ancient Israelite and why Jesus would say the things he says and does the things that he does, and can tie a lot of pieces together. And really, this is a rabbit hole I'm not going to go down, but it really can tie a lot of things that happen in our world today together. If you want to talk about that, I'm happy to do that at a different time in person. Maybe it gets more into the conspiracy realm, and I don't want to tread lightly into that or heavy into that. So that's good. That's really good. I'll give one more opportunity. Anybody online have anything they want clarification or it's just burning to talk about at the moment? And then we'll kind of end this because I went over time here. This is awesome, by the way. This has blessed me so much, just having all these people sit here and want to be a part of this and talk about nerdy Bible stuff. You are welcome, Don. While they're writing, absolutely. What's your question?
With the youth, we've always done Old Testament chapters. I definitely think after doing this, that's the place to start. But how might this study or our approaches or the fruit from it look differently if it were in the New Testament? Or would it look different?
It looks totally different. And transparently, it's very different. Greek is not written the same way by that point. And to be honest, when you're reading the Hebrew scriptures, you're reading a conglomeration of the original authorship and editing that takes place over a very long, meticulous time through the inspiration of God. So don't misunderstand me. I do believe the Bible is edited, but I do not believe it was done without inspiration. And inspiration is a process, not a moment. The New Testament, however, were not written in that same fashion or edited in the same fashion. And so what you're going to get is a piece of literary art that looks different than the well-crafted Hebrew scriptures. And you're going to get Paul, who will write paragraphs that end up being one single incredibly complex Greek sentence that to a Greek reader would blow their mind. But to an English person, you're like, I don't get it. Where it does relate is that, especially the Gospels are intentionally finishing off or fixing the pattern that's been set in the Old Testament. The New Testament and then the Acts and Romans are going to be really proving so much of what you've now read about our complex, lost necessity for Jesus and how we are to then follow up in this new covenant. And then the epistles are going to very much be, it's going to be the mentor who's going, okay, look, now what in the world do we do with all this? Like, how do we, now that we know that we're all lost and that it's open and free for all people, then how do we protect ourselves from it happening again? And how do we reach the world with the gospel? And then Revelation is going to definitely be very much like there's hope, stay strong. It's going to get bad, but it'll all be for a purpose kind of situation. Super oversimplified, but it does look different. And so repeated words and phrases aren't always going to be the same thing. Some of them will, some of them won't. Hard right turns, it's not all narrative. So it's not always going to seem that way. But in like John and Luke are like Hebrew masters. Like Luke is going to tie in the Old Testament like crazy. John is going to make you go on a treasure hunt. Like he is going to say a phrase that is meant to tie everything back to everything that happens in the Old Testament. And it's crazy. He will tell a whole narrative and you will have no idea that you just read the Israelite Exodus experience. And you're like, wait, what? Like, how did he just tie all that together somehow? And it's amazing, but it does look different. And so,
and the New Testament does tie back to the Adam and Eve story.
100%, yes.
Okay.
In that, it may not use patterns like they saw and they took, but it will say, it will say things like Jesus is fleeing at his birth, fleeing to Egypt for a couple years because a maniac wants to murder all the newborns. And then you realize, oh my goodness, he's going through an exodus. He goes down to Egypt. There's a murder of the newborns. He comes safely out of Egypt. He goes back to Israel. Israel was supposed to go back to Israel, but they didn't go back to Israel. They go and wander in the wilderness. So you'll see that he'll go back into micro status and he'll get baptized. He'll go through the waters and then he'll go up and be tempted in the wilderness. And it's Israel who went through the waters, but then remained and was tempted in the wilderness and failed. He'll pick 12 disciples. They'll have 12 tribes. Like he'll take all of these things and they'll micro picture it and fulfill, fix what was messed up in the Old Testament. And it'll be crazy. Yeah, it'll be really cool. But it's just the tool set is different. And it's not as easy as that, but knowing that it's different, but knowing that it's all very intentional will still help shape how you read it. And you won't just have to settle for accepting the what's on page, but just going on the treasure hunt and finding out how is this purposeful and fulfilling something that was very, very well crafted in the Old Testament. And what does that mean now for us? Like, how do we not fit these patterns again, which we unfortunately fall right back into? You have doubled my study time and prep and teaching to Sunday. That makes me so happy, Miss Pearl. I'm really that's like some of the best news I've ever heard. So, hey guys, thank you so much. I've taken enough of everyone's time here. But if y'all like this, please, 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 I don't want to just make assumptions. If this is something that you are blessed by or you want to keep happening, make sure you let us know, comment or text us, call, whatever you want. And next week, if everything works out well and there's not a baby that's delivered, we're going to have Brother Jason is going to join us. And so that'll be a really, really special time where we get to sit down and talk about that. So make sure you join for that. But otherwise, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you joining us. And let me just close this in a word of prayer. Father, thank you very much for another opportunity to use technology, to use this time where we can all get together at different places and to just learn a little bit more about what your word is, what it does, and how spending time with you just reveals how amazing you truly are. Father, I pray that you'll be with each of these individuals as in their own personal study times. I pray that you will begin to reveal to them that treasure, that how incredibly purposeful and amazing your word is, and that you'll birth a desire in each and every one of us to want to do that every day. Father, we love you and we're so thankful for you. It's in your name we ask. Amen. You guys have a wonderful day.